Sitting on the border between the states of Tennessee and North Carolina, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is a place of amazing beauty and natural wonders. From the stunning leaves of fall, to the snow skiing of winter, to the trail hiking of spring, to the synchronous fireflies of summer, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park truly has something for everyone. It's easy to see why this is America's most visited national park. Within about a day's drive of the major population centers of the East Coast, the Great Smokies are a true tourist mecca, snuggled into the rolling hills and ancient mountains of Appalachia. However, there is a dark side to the Smokies. It's not often spoken of in a place where the tourist dollar is king, but strange things happen in these Smoky Mountains. Arguably, the most chilling occurrences here are the cases of missing persons, people who vanished without a trace, people who simply walked into the woods and disappeared into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again. Here are 4 cases that boggle the mind. At the time of her disappearance, Teresa Lyn Gibson was a 16-year-old Bearden High School student from Knoxville, Tennessee, which is, oddly enough, the same city and neighborhood where Dennis Martin lived when he vanished only 7 years prior. On October 8, 1976, Trini and her classmates had been treated to a surprise field trip by their science teacher. According to the official story, the students didn't know where they would be going until they were already en route on the bus. After traveling approximately 50 miles to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the students had been hiking near both Clingman's Dome, which is the highest point in the Tennessee side of the Smokies, and then followed the Forney Ridge Trail to nearby Andrews Bald. Trini was known to have hiked at least part of the almost 2-mile trail with classmate Robert Simpson, who was a friend of Trini's older brother. Afterwards, other students agreed that the group reached Andrews Bald around 1:30 p.m., and many recall having seen Trini and Robert have lunch together. Being October, it was not only foggy that day in the Smokies, but also on the cold side. Since the trip was a surprise, Trini wasn't dressed very warmly and ended up borrowing Robert's jacket, which she was apparently still wearing when she disappeared. Robert later stated that he and Trini did not hike back together, instead having been separated when Robert went off to track a bear, as he put it. Other students on the field trip could remember having seen Trini amongst them at approximately 3 p.m., hiking along with the group headed back toward the parking lot near Clingman's Dome. When the group stopped to take a rest, Trini continued on. Just a few moments later, on that fateful fall afternoon, would be the last time Trini Gibson was ever seen. Some of the group claimed to have seen Trini stop a few dozen yards down the trail and bend down, as if she were looking at something off the trail in the woods. Then, inexplicably, Trini stepped off the trail and into the mists of time, never to be seen or heard from again, with nary a trace or whisper to be found. Many theories surfaced afterwards, including that Trini, soon to be graduating, had instead planned a rendezvous in the parking lot with an older boyfriend, with whom she simply took off, telling no one in the process. While that theory is interesting, I've always found it implausible, since Trini didn't know until the day of the field trip where her science class would be going. Items found at the spot where Trini stepped off the trail included 3 cigarette butts and a partial can of beer. More fresh cigarette butts of the same variety were found at the edge of the roadway not far from the parking lot, and this was as far as scent dogs would later track Trini. Now, although Robert Simpson was never seriously considered as a suspect according to authorities, other students claimed that they had spotted Trini's comb on the dash of his car. Robert was reported to have told Trini's family that he believed Kelvin Bowman was to blame. Bowman had once been obsessed with Trini and was even shot in the foot by Trini's mother once when he was trying to break into the Gibson residence. Robert further confided to Trini's sister that if Kelvin has her, he'll kill her. Kelvin had spent 6 months in a youth facility after the incident and was back attending classes at Bearden High School when Trini disappeared. Although some students claimed to have seen Kelvin's car shadowing the bus on the field trip, he was cleared after the school principal verified that Kelvin had been at school the entire day. A few years ago, I mentioned the case to one of my family members in East Tennessee and was shocked to find out she was friends with Trini's younger sister, Tina. My relative was unaware of all the details of the case and simply knew that Tina's sister had gone missing in the Smoky Mountains a few decades ago. I jumped at the chance to talk with Tina, not as an investigator, but rather just as someone who was curious about her sister's disappearance. Tina was friendly and very forthcoming about her knowledge of the case, but sadly didn't have any real earth-shattering information beyond what is already known. I think the most interesting aspect that I learned from Tina's perspective was how the vanishing of her older sister absolutely devastated her parents and destroyed the home life of the entire family. Tina stated that her parents had always been strict, but after Trini's disappearance, this increased many-fold. Her parents' feelings went from sadness and shock to outright anger and fighting. Trini's parents, each blaming the other and sometimes the siblings for the disappearance, eventually went through a bitter divorce. Tina left home as soon as she was 18 and was basically estranged from the rest of her family. She said that she had always felt that Trini was miserable with the constrictive home life and simply made her escape at the first opportunity which presented itself. Tina also stated she felt like Trini was alive, out there somewhere, and enjoying a life of freedom, perhaps in sunny Southern California. Sadly, Tina passed away in 2016 without ever knowing for sure of her older sister's fate. Wherever she is, in October of this year, it will be 43 years since Trini Gibson walked ahead of her classmates on the trail and simply ceased to exist. Yet another strange disappearance from within the wilds of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This one happened on September 25th, 1981, near the Deep Creek Campground on the Deep Creek Trail. Thelma Pauline Melton, Polly to her friends and family, was initially hiking with two friends and was last seen at approximately 4 p.m. While the trio were hiking, Melton suddenly decided to increase her stride and speed, which caused her to move ahead of her other two hiking companions. The two ladies observed her crest a small hill on the trail and move out of their view on the other side. It was the last time Polly Melton would ever be seen. Polly's two hiking buddies, who knew her quite well, assumed that she had gone back to the Deep Creek campground, where she and her husband had their Airstream trailer set up in a rented space. While the other two ladies finished their hike and arrived back at the campground at around 4:30 p.m., they were surprised to find no sign of Polly having returned. Polly's husband was still inside the Airstream, where he'd remained while Polly and the other ladies had gone on their short hike. When asked, Mr. Melton stated that he had not seen nor heard from Polly since the ladies had left in a group earlier in the afternoon. Polly's husband officially reported her as a missing person to a park ranger at about 6 p.m., approximately 2 hours since her hiking partners had seen her disappear from view ahead of them on the trail. Her husband further stated that Polly was very well acquainted with the Deep Creek Trail, which runs parallel with Deep Creek in the park, and from which the campground also takes its name. There was nothing found to indicate that Polly had ventured off of the trail, nor was there any indication of an abduction or any sign of a struggle or any reason to suspect foul play in the area of the trail where Polly was last seen. The only thing her husband noticed to be missing from the Airstream trailer was Polly's cigarettes, although the other ladies she was hiking with were fairly certain that she was carrying her cigarettes and lighter with her on the trail hike when she disappeared. Also, as far as the husband could remember, Polly had apparently seemed to follow what was her normal routine throughout the day prior to her vanishing, with the sole notable exception being that Polly chose not to volunteer at a local senior citizen center where she helped serve meals to the elderly patrons. Although she usually volunteered at the senior citizen center every day, she had, for unknown reasons, chosen not to attend on the day of her disappearance. Other than apparently her cigarettes and lighter, Polly was not carrying anything else with her. She had no money, no identification, nor any of her prescription medications with her when she vanished into thin air. Nor did she have any keys with her, as her doctor had not permitted her to drive at the time due to underlying medical conditions. Her husband was said to have had the keys to their Airstream trailer and to their vehicle in his pocket at the time of her disappearance. And, as far as her husband or friends knew, Polly was not entertaining any thoughts at the time of her disappearance, although it was reported that she had been under a doctor's care recently for minor depression, but was not considered a danger to herself or others, certainly. Polly was known to have been a heavy user of Valium for its sedation and calming effects, as recently as 1979, a full 2 years before she vanished in the mountains. Although it was assumed that Polly had long since given up her need for Valium when she went missing in 1981, her husband noted that his prescription of Valium appeared to have gone missing at approximately the same time as his wife. It is not believed that Polly took her husband's medication, however, as she left behind her own necessary prescription medicine bottles. After her disappearance, Polly's church pastor came forward and stated she had confessed to him that she was grieving over the recent death of her mother shortly before the time in which she vanished. The pastor, although he had no evidence to back up the claim, also stated that he believed Polly may have been involved in an extramarital affair behind her husband's back at the time of the disappearance. But again, this is only speculation on the pastor's part. Oddly enough, and perhaps supporting the pastor's theory, Polly's supervisor at the Senior Citizen Center, where she was a daily volunteer, later told authorities that although Polly had never been observed to use the facility's telephone, she had, indeed, placed a telephone call to an unknown party on the day before she went missing. It is unknown, however, if the call which Polly placed from the Senior Citizen Center was in any way related to her subsequent vanishing act. As far as is known, Polly Melton has not been seen or heard from since that fateful fall afternoon in September of 1981. As of the date of this recording, Thelma Pauline Polly Melton's disappearance remains unsolved. While most of the infamous cases of missing people in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park are from the 20th century, one of the more disturbing disappearances is a mystery for the 21st century. Enter one Derek Joseph Luking of Louisville, Tennessee. He left the Micro Hotel where he had spent the night in Cherokee, North Carolina at 4 a.m. the morning of Saturday, March 17, 2012. Luking was last observed alone on the hotel surveillance cameras carrying a small backpack. Derek was 24 years old at the time, and although depressed over the recent loss of his grandfather, was not known to be. His father states that once they gained entrance to the room where Derek had previously spent the night, there was a Bible on the bed and a partially consumed bottle of liquor on the floor. Derek wasn't known to be a drinker, and his father says the way the items were laid out, it looked as if Derek were torn with making a choice. Derek's automobile was spotted the same morning at approximately 8:30 a.m. at Newfound Gap in the Smoky Mountains. A note containing the cryptic and mysterious phrase, "Don't look for me," was found inside his car, along with Derek's wallet and the key to his car. The cryptic message on the note was not addressed to anyone in particular, and even Derek's distraught family thought it could have been left for Park Service employees so they wouldn't tow his car away in his absence, as if he was planning to be away from the vehicle for an extended period of time. His family also revealed that Derek was a fan and follower of extreme outdoorsman Bear Grylls, and most likely had enough survival skills and equipment to endure a long stay in the wilds of the Great Smokies. However, Derek did not take very much of the $1,000+ of equipment or supplies he had recently purchased with him when he left his car. Based on the receipts, and according to a statement made by Derek's father, the family believed the only things he took with him were at least a backpack, a waterproof watch, a Bear Grylls survival tool pack, including a multi-tool, small flashlight, and a fire starter rod, a Gerber pack axe, several pages of a military survival manual, a knife sharpener, a compass/thermometer, 100 feet of black parachute cord, a headlamp, a pocket knife, an iPod Touch, and some granola bars. Perhaps the oddest thing about the disappearance is that no one is certain Derek even entered the park on that day, meaning he may have gone missing in the parking area, thus having vanished before he even set foot in the actual park, which would be a first for missing person cases in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Even though Park Service employees state that Newfound Gap area was even busier than usual that fateful spring day, not one person in the park, park employee, hiker, tourist, ranger, or otherwise, could recall seeing Derek, despite the thousands of flyers that were tacked up and passed out to hikers traveling in both directions. Even the Park Service admits that it would be highly unusual for someone not to have at least passed Derek on the hiking trails. Despite extensive search and rescue efforts, no trace of Derek has ever been found. On a Facebook page titled Find Derek Luking, which is maintained and monitored by the family, this message is listed even though the young man has been missing a little over 7 years as of this recording. There is still the possibility that Derek Luking is not in the park, and we would like to make sure the information is out there so people can look for Derek out in the world. We have not given up hope on finding Derek, and are doing everything in our power to work with and help the rangers who are investigating, as well as trying to make sure the information is out in the world as well. One of the most puzzling and disturbing disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains is that of Dennis Martin. Just 6 years old when he vanished, Dennis made a huge impression on me. I was just a few months younger than Dennis at the time, and it was my first exposure to the concept of a missing child. It took a bit for me to wrap my 5-year-old mind around the event. How could a living, breathing boy, just like me, suddenly disappear. It can and does happen, and in June of 1969, it did. Dennis Martin walked into the bush of Spence Field and into the pages of history, folklore, and Smoky Mountain mythology. The story goes that Dennis, his older brother, his father, and grandfather had all gone to Cades Cove to spend Father's Day in the beautiful outdoors of the Great Smokies. The weather in the mountains was exceptionally cool on this particular weekend, a respite from the heat that Dennis, his brother, and father had endured at their home an hour and a half away or so in the Bearden neighborhood of Knoxville. Bob Martin, Dennis's father, was a prominent architect at the time in Knoxville, but he enjoyed the trappings of being a family man and father to his two boys. He was anxious on that weekend to pack up the boys along with their granddad and spend some quality time in the Great Smokies, just the boys outing, if you will. While they were relaxing after the somewhat rigorous hike up to Spence Field, the Martin family rested a bit. While they were resting, another family approached. Oddly enough, and in one of the many fortean or coincidental strange facts regarding this case, the other family shared the same last surname. The two Mr. Martins shook hands and agreed that it would be a good idea for the boys from both families to play together, while the older gents continued to relax around the campsite. After about an hour or so, what happened next has been told a couple of different ways. I'm unsure as to which is absolutely correct, so I'll err on the side of caution and relate both versions as I've heard them. It was said that the boys decided to play a game of hide-and-seek, and that Bob Martin, Dennis's father, observed the younger boy pick a hiding spot behind a clump of bushes. The alternate version says that the older boys decided to scare the adults and made a plan to walk in a giant circle and come up behind the older men. In this telling, Dennis, who was quite a bit younger and somewhat small for his age, decided to go a different direction and meet up with the older lads near the aforementioned clump of bushes. Either way, Bob Martin states that he watched Dennis walk into a clump of brush that day. It was the last time he would ever see his son. After the game of hide-and-seek, or scare the adults, depending on which version you prefer, Bob Martin noticed that Dennis was no longer with the group. He walked over to the clump of bushes and entered it. Then he walked all the way around it, several times. He questioned the other boys and adults, and they all concurred that they had not laid eyes on young Dennis after the games had begun. It was in this moment that Bob realized his son was missing. He instructed Dennis' granddad to hike down to the ranger station, while he himself took off in a run down a section of the famous Appalachian Trail that led through the edge of their camping area. This set in motion the greatest manhunt and search and rescue effort the Great Smoky Mountains National Park had ever witnessed. Within 2 hours, hundreds of park rangers, Forestry Service employees, and civilian volunteers were combing the hills and woods of Cades Cove, trying to locate the lost boy. As darkness fell, the weather took a turn for the worst. Again, an odd, strange coincidence that often happens when people go missing. And torrential rainfalls began in the Smokies. The rain and winds would last several days, severely hampering the search efforts, as well as obliterating many clues, such as any footprints Dennis may have left behind. The FBI was later called in on the case, which is an interesting fact considering the FBI usually does not work missing person cases unless they feel that a crime has been involved. I'll let you listeners draw your own conclusions regarding that statement. Furthermore, the details of the case have been denied, although multiple Freedom of Information Act documents have been filed. And oddly enough, the FBI agent from the local Knoxville, Tennessee field office who was over the case committed under mysterious circumstances. Whatever information and knowledge he had regarding the Dennis Martin case, he took to the grave with him. Another family that was visiting Cades Cove that day, but in another area named the Key family, had ventured to a certain place where a ranger told them they might be able to spot some of the black bear that are commonly sighted in the mountains. While the family was looking for bear, they heard a blood-curdling scream and then witnessed what they first thought was a bear, but later described as a hairy, rugged man running uphill away from them through the trees and underbrush. They were not aware of the disappearance until they returned home the next day, when they realized they might have witnessed something in regard to Dennis Martin's mysterious disappearance. They contacted the FBI. Strangely enough, the FBI asked them not to return to Cades Cove to point out the area where the odd sighting took place, but instead offered to meet them at a location that was halfway for both parties. The agent took their statement, but apparently never shared it with Dennis' father, who was livid when he heard it mentioned on the local news in Knoxville. This began a rift that would forever exist between Bob Martin and the law enforcement agencies working on the case, the FBI in particular. Mr. Martin stated that he felt he had been lied to by the agents and the media and could no longer trust any of them. Through the entire scenario, Bob Martin refused to come off the mountain, and he spent days and days searching for his young son. As the volunteers swelled and dwindled as any hope of finding Dennis alive evaporated, the search and rescue effort sadly transformed into a recovery operation. Unfortunately, Bob Martin passed away in 2014, on Halloween no less, with that year being the 45th anniversary of Dennis' disappearance. Bob rarely spoke with the media and essentially died a broken man. One cannot imagine the mental anguish of enduring over 4 decades without even a hint of closure. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.